Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. Holly the Phantom Photographer. Holly Arnold stood on the cliffs of the Isle of Wight, the salt breeze tugging at her hair and the setting sun casting a golden glow over the landscape. She had always been drawn to the rugged beauty of this place, its crumbling castles and ancient woods, the way the light played on the rolling waves of the English Channel. But today there was an edge to the wind, a whisper of something just beyond the edge of perception. Holly was a photographer, and her work often took her to places like this, places with history, with stories etched into the very stones. She lifted her camera and began to shoot, capturing the way the dying light painted the world in shades of amber and crimson. As she focused on a distant ruin, she saw it, a flicker of movement, a shadow where there should be none. She lowered the camera and blinked, but there was nothing there. Holly felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't the first time she'd seen something strange through her lens. Over the past few months, her photographs had begun to reveal more than just the physical world. Faces in windows, figures in fog, shapes that defy explanation. She had tried to dismiss them as tricks of the light, glitches in her equipment. But the occurrences were becoming more frequent and harder to ignore. Back in her small cottage, Holly developed the day's photographs. She watched as the images took shape, each one a moment frozen in time. When she reached the photo of the ruin, her heart skipped a beat. There, standing among the stones, was a figure, a woman in old-fashioned dress, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. Holly's hands trembled as she placed the photo aside. Who was this ghostly figure? And why did she appear in her pictures? That night, Holly couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. The woman in the photograph seemed so real, so desperate. It felt like she was trying to tell her something. Holly decided that she had to find out who this woman was and why she was appearing in her photos. The next day, Holly visited the local library, delving into the history of the Isle of Wight. She found stories of shipwrecks and lost souls, of ancient curses and tragic love affairs. But one story stood out, the tale of Eliza Gray, a young woman who had lived in the ruined castle she had photographed. Eliza had been betrothed to a cruel man, a local lord who had treated her poorly. On the eve of their wedding, she had vanished, and her body was never found. Some said she had run away, others that she had thrown herself from the cliffs. But there were whispers of something darker, of a curse that had claimed her soul. Holly felt a chill as she read Eliza's story. Could this be the woman in her photograph? And if so, what did she want? That evening, Holly returned to the ruin. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the stones. She raised her camera and began to shoot, calling out to Eliza, asking her to appear. At first, there was nothing. But then, as the light began to fade, Holly saw her faint, glowing figure among the stones. Eliza's eyes met hers, and Holly felt a rush of emotions, fear, sorrow, desperation. She snapped a picture, and the ghostly figure began to fade. But before she disappeared completely, Eliza raised a hand, pointing towards the cliffs. Holly followed the direction of Eliza's gesture, her heart pounding. She reached the edge of the cliffs and looked down. There, among the rocks, she saw something glinting in the fading light. Clambering down carefully, she found an old locket, its chain broken and its surface tarnished. Inside was a portrait of Eliza, along with a lock of hair and a small piece of parchment. The parchment held a single word, help. Back in her cottage, Holly examined the locket and the note. Eliza was reaching out to her, asking for help. But help with what? Holly decided to return to the library, hoping to find more clues. As she delved deeper into the history of the Isle of Wight, she uncovered more stories of ghostly apparitions and unexplained disappearances. And in every case, there was a common thread, a dark figure, a shadowy presence that seemed to be behind the tragedies. Holly began to feel that she was being watched. She would catch glimpses of a dark figure out of the corner of her eye, and at night she heard whispers and footsteps in her cottage. The spirits were trying to communicate with her, but so was something else, something sinister. She knew she was getting close to the truth, and that whatever it was, it did not want to be discovered. One night, Holly had a vivid dream. She was in the ruin again, but this time it was whole, as it had been in Eliza's time. She saw Eliza standing at the edge of the cliffs, weeping. Behind her was a shadowy figure, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Holly tried to call out to Eliza, but no sound came from her lips. The shadowy figure turned towards her, and she felt a wave of terror wash over her. She woke up screaming, her heart racing. Determined to end the nightmare, Holly decided to confront the dark force. She returned to the ruin, this time armed with her camera and the locket. As the sun set, she called out to Eliza, asking her to appear. The ghostly figure materialized, her eyes filled with fear. Holly felt a chill as she sensed the presence of the dark force. She snapped a picture, and the camera flashed, capturing the ghostly figure and the shadowy presence behind her. The air grew cold, and Holly felt a pressure on her chest, as if an invisible hand was trying to crush her. She struggled to breathe, but she refused to give up. She held up the locket, calling out to Eliza, asking her to use its power. The ghostly figure reached out, touching the locket. There was a flash of light, and the dark force let out a horrible scream. Holly felt the pressure lift, and the shadowy figure began to dissipate, its form unraveling like smoke in a wind. Eliza's figure began to fade as well, but this time there was a look of peace on her face. She nodded to Holly a silent thank you, before disappearing completely. Holly felt a sense of relief, knowing that she had helped Eliza find peace. But she also knew that the dark force was not completely gone. It had been weakened, but not destroyed. It was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next opportunity. Holly continued her work as a photographer, but now she was more vigilant, more aware of the spirits that surrounded her. She knew that she had a gift, a connection to the other side, and she was determined to use it to help those who were trapped between worlds. But she also knew that she had made a powerful enemy, one that would stop at nothing to claim the souls of the living and the dead. And so Holly's journey continued, each photograph a step closer to uncovering the truth, each ghostly apparition a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. She was the phantom photographer, a seeker of lost souls, and a warrior against the darkness that sought to consume them. And as long as she had her camera and her courage, she knew she would never stop fighting. The encounter with the dark force had left Holly more vigilant and determined. Yet a heavy sense of foreboding followed her every step. The Isle of Wight, with its haunting beauty, held more secrets than she had ever imagined. As she delved deeper into her work, she began to notice that the ghosts in her photographs were not random. Each spirit seemed connected to the island's darker history, and each one had a story to tell. Holly's reputation as the phantom photographer grew, and with it the curiosity of the locals. They began to share their own ghost stories and experiences, often accompanied by old photographs and relics. Holly's cottage became a small museum of the supernatural, filled with eerie mementos and spectral images. She spent countless hours analyzing these items, looking for patterns and connections. One day, a man named Richard Blackwood visited Holly. He was an older gentleman, with a stern face and a sense of urgency about him. He brought with him an old, tattered photograph album, its leather cover worn and cracked with age. "I've heard of your work, Miss Arnold," he said, placing the album on her table, "and I believe you might be the only one who can help me." Holly opened the album carefully. The photographs inside were of a large, imposing man at Blackwood Manor, as Richard explained. The manor had been in his family for generations, but it had fallen into disrepair after a series of tragic events. Richard believed that the spirits of his ancestors were trapped there, tormented by the same dark force Holly had encountered. "Please," he implored, "come to Blackwood Manor. Help me uncover the truth and set them free." Holly agreed, sensing that this was the next step in her journey. She packed her camera and equipment and set off with Richard to the manor. As they approached, the imposing structure loomed over them, its windows like dark eyes watching their every move. The air was thick with a sense of dread. Inside, the manor was a labyrinth of dark hallways and dusty rooms. Holly could feel the presence of the spirits, their sadness and fear palpable. She began to take photographs, each flash of her camera revealing glimpses of the past. She saw figures in old-fashioned clothes, their faces etched with sorrow and pain. They seemed to reach out to her, begging for release. As Holly delved deeper into the manor's history, she discovered a pattern of cruelty and betrayal. The Blackwood family had been cursed, their lives marred by violence and madness. At the heart of it all was the dark force feeding on their suffering and growing stronger with each generation. One night, as Holly was reviewing her photographs, she noticed something strange. In each image, there was a small, glowing symbol, a sigil. She recognized it as an ancient mark, one associated with summoning and binding spirits. She realized that the dark force had been using the sigil to trap the souls of the Blackwood family, feeding off their pain. Determined to break the curse, Holly confronted Richard. She showed him the photographs and explained what she had discovered. Together, they scoured the manor, searching for the source of the sigil's power. In the deepest, darkest part of the basement, they found a hidden chamber filled with old books, ritual objects, and a large, ornate mirror. The mirror was the key. Holly could feel the dark energy emanating from it, the twisted reflection of the dark force. She knew that to break the curse, she would have to face it directly. With Richard's help, she began to prepare for the confrontation. They gathered the items they would need: salt for protection, candles for light, and the locket that had once belonged to Eliza Gray, now a talisman of hope. As midnight approached, Holly stood before the mirror, her reflection distorted and menacing. She could see the dark force lurking within, its eyes gleaming with malice. She took a deep breath and began the ritual, chanting the words she had learned from the old books. The air grew cold and the shadows deepened. The dark force began to emerge from the mirror, a swelling mass of darkness and hatred. Holly held up the locket, its light shining brightly in the gloom. The dark force recoiled, its form flickering and unstable. Holly could feel its anger, its desire to consume her. But she stood her ground, focusing on the light of the locket and the spirit she had come to help. The battle was intense. The dark force lashed out, trying to break Holly's concentration. But she held firm, calling on the spirits of the Blackwood family to aid her. One by one, they appeared, their forms glowing with a soft, ethereal light. They surrounded the dark force, their presence weakening it. Holly continued to chant, her voice growing stronger with each word. Finally, with a piercing scream, the dark force shattered, its essence dissipating into the ether. The mirror cracked, and the chamber was filled with a blinding light. When it faded, Holly found herself surrounded by the spirits, their faces filled with gratitude and peace. They began to fade, their forms dissolving into the light. The curse was broken, and the spirits were free. Richard thanked Holly, his eyes filled with tears. "You've saved my family, Miss Arnold. I can never repay you for what you've done." Holly smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "Just remember, the past can hold us captive if we let it, but we have the power to break free and move forward." As Holly left Blackwood Manor, she felt a sense of closure. But she knew that her journey was far from over. There were still many spirits out there, trapped and tormented, and dark forces that sought to use their power for evil. She was the phantom photographer, a seeker of truth and a guardian of the lost. And she would continue to fight, one photograph at a time. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.